Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I'd like to share with you a chapter from my book. Now, in previous episodes, I haven't been talking too much about the books that I've written, but the main one that's available on Amazon, there you go, shameless plug here, is called Self-Empowerment, Have the Life You Want. And it's not really for a gay-specific audience. It's a book that really came out of my first 18 years or so of clinical practice. And for a while I had another podcast show called the Have the Life You Want with Ken Howard, LCSW, and that's available. But I wanted to share it on this show, on the Gay Therapy LA show, because I think it has some relevance to gay men's lives. And what I thought I would do to kind of share with you a sample of the book, I want to share with you the mental health chapter of the book. And then maybe we'll talk about, as we go, how to apply that more specifically to gay men. So once again, the book is Self-Empowerment, Have the Life You Want, How to Close the Gap Between How Life Is and How You Would Like It to Be. And I wrote this in 2013. So we'll just play story time today, and I'll read you a story, okay? So the mental health chapter goes like this: defining mental health. Considering the concept of self-empowerment in mental health is a complex task. Immediately, the term mental health for some people can arouse anxiety in the sense that they feel that a poor mental health means someone who is crazy, out of control, psychotic, burdensome, fearsome, and a whole host of negative connotations. As much as Hollywood has given us wonderful gifts of entertainment to cherish through the ages, they have sometimes promoted the stigma of anything other than pristine mental health. Movies like Psycho and Silence of the Lambs teach that people with mental illness are to be feared like no other kind of person on earth. And yet these audiences usually don't know, as the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill likes to remind the public, that people with severe mental illnesses are far more often the victims of crime than they are the perpetrators of it. I've worked with people with severe mental illness in a psychiatric hospital and in local psychiatric rehabilitation programs, and conditions such as schizophrenia or severe bipolar I disorder can be heartbreaking in their severity. But even then, there is treatment, coping, and adaptation, and that's called psychosocial rehabilitation, that helps these people develop independent living skills and improve their quality of life. Yet when we discuss mental health here, I'm really addressing readers who are not necessarily suffering with a major mental illness such as schizophrenia, but one of the average person might have with less severe conditions, or your average ups and downs in mental health. Yet to consider what the concept of mental health is, we should define it. There are perhaps too many ways to define mental health. I think it can be confused with feelings of ideal comfort, relaxation, happiness, contentment, or joy. But mental health is perhaps the capacity to handle many different feelings and impulses and still maintain some personal equilibrium and social grace. Immanuel Kant's rules for happiness are three things in life that we need: something to do, someone to love, and something to hope for. I think also that mental health is supported by just being near the things we love, the people, the work, the hobbies, the cultural rituals, the pastimes, and anything that brings us joy to see or do or just be close to. Being near the things we love, whatever they are, can be a buoyant to our mood. So when you're not feeling well in terms of your mental health, ask yourself, what do I need to be nearer to in order to feel better? Sometimes you need a good cry, sometimes to go watch a funny TV show, sometimes to go home, sometimes to have a hug, sometimes to have a whole day to yourself to just go someplace and wander around even having this book handy might provide an immediate occasional boost. In my practice, my psychotherapy practice, we discuss what mental health means to each client and what would have to change about themselves or the people around them or their circumstances in order to achieve a sense of well-being beyond their current state. So let's look at mental health issues and symptoms. Mental health can be defined as the absence of symptoms. It's hard to say we are in the pristine zone of mental health if we're suffering from the symptoms that come with depression, let's say. These symptoms may include persistent and unrelenting sad mood, hopelessness, futility about the future, a lack of pleasure in things we used to enjoy or not even doing the things we used to enjoy, fatigue, problems falling asleep or staying asleep, self-isolation, irritability, crying more often, and persistent negative thoughts about ourselves, the world around us, or our future. And depression has to be distinguished from normal periods of just sad mood, which we all have at times. Clinical depression is stronger, more pervasive, and less responsive to actions that normally raise our mood. It is perhaps the most common disorder that I see in clients and the most common clinical diagnosis that I give. Depression can vary widely in its severity, from a mild case where the person doesn't even seek treatment to the major case where a person must seek permanent disability benefits. I've always said that if the Eskimos have dozens of words for snow, as they're rumored to have, then therapists need dozens of words for depression to describe the many subtle and ever insidious manifestations that depression takes. For many clients in my practice, the combination of therapy and antidepressant medication brings much improved outcomes in managing depression, even if it does tend to recur. Anxiety can also keep us out of the pristine mental health zone. Anxiety is marked by excessive worrying, ruminating, fear, fidgeting, tummy trouble, diarrhea, obsessive thoughts, or self-isolation. Obsessions and compulsions can take us out of that zone and can be defined as having to arrange our personal belongings in a certain order, counting things irrationally, touching or not touching objects in a certain way, or the inability to stop thinking of a certain person or thing. Anger is another condition that can work against us, such as paying the price for not controlling our aggressive impulses, such that we harm ourselves via embarrassment or others by alienating them, or even doing physical harm to objects or others. Fatigue can be a sign of impaired mental health all on its own. While this is more of physical symptoms that can accompany colds, the flu, chronic fatigue syndrome, HIV, cancer, or other illnesses, fatigue can also be a certain mental fatigue that is related to depression but can be a symptom of chronic stress. Fear is another impediment to mental health, anticipating a negative outcome of something we are invested in or care about. We cannot be givers and receivers of good energy and into the green zone of life, functioning as our best selves, if we are living in fear. It's interesting to note how physical pain can be an impediment to mental health. Few people know that living in chronic pain can be a trigger for depression and even suicidality. Clara Blandick, the actress who played Auntie Anne in The Wizard of Oz, committed suicide over her inability to obtain relief from severe and deteriorating arthritis pain. One could also say that self-empowerment in mental health is living a life in the absence of addictions, whether these are chemical, such as alcohol, nicotine, crystal methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, prescription opiates, prescription tranquilizers, or something that is kind of ritualistic, like spending too much, or eating too much and binging, or working, having poor work-life balance, gambling, or sexual behavior that can feel out of control, even though sex addiction as a thing isn't a mental health diagnosis and really isn't a legitimate disorder to people who really study sexology. That's a very common myth that I talk about in my sex therapy practice. While an active addiction is working in our lives, we can't reach the zone of optimum functioning for ourselves, or for our relationships, or for our work. Addictions stand between us and our muse with life. Muses are the Greek goddesses who inspire the creation of art and literature. And I think much of the recovering person's work is doing whatever they need to do to liberate themselves from the tyranny of an addiction, or a dependence, rather, we say, where cognitions, behaviors, and social support, and for some spirituality, combine to achieve sobriety. That state of a clear mind, unfettered and unburdened by something we're dependent on. Another definition of mental health, on which I work with many of my clients, relates to doing what you love. This is perhaps one of the most important existential questions that a person can talk about in his life. Am I doing what I love? This can be in your personal life, with relationships and hobbies, or in your professional life. Perhaps the most mentally healthy people in the world are those who feel that they are truly doing what they love the majority of the time. Finding what this is for you and finding a way to get it is often the work of therapy. It can also be the work of career coaching or other types of life coaching. And mastering self-empowerment can help you get there. I don't think we can be self-empowered for optimum mental health without developing a positive sense of self. How do you feel about you? How do others feel about you? What kind of feedback do you get about who you are and what you do? One of the most challenging aspects of my work is frustration that I have meeting and working with these wonderful people who don't think of themselves as wonderful. They can hardly see anything good in themselves at all. And this is when we work on their self-esteem as an important component of their therapy and their mental health, regardless of any other treatment goals that they set for themselves. Without a positive sense of self, it's hard to do your best work and form your best relationships, or get into that wonderful zone of being at your best, being your best self. Self-empowerment in mental health is not just about how we feel about ourselves. It can also be about cultivating good relationships. The saying goes, no one is an island. Every one of us needs supportive relationships surrounding us. It's like the spokes of a wheel to make that wheel spin. We need to see ourselves mirrored in others in order to orient us in the world. We need each other, literally, to exist. Humans are social animals. Prime mental health occurs when we have cultivated positive relationships with others who are our colleagues at work or in another vocational activity, such as volunteer work or charity or philanthropic work. Our friends, and perhaps most importantly in our spouse partner, is maybe the most important relationship there. Something that I learned doing research with people who were both homeless and severely mentally ill was that it was not just a lack of domicile and the presence of a mental illness that impeded the lives of those people, but it was also social isolation, a disaffiliation of the normal social bonds that most people function with. That's how it was put by Grigsby in 1990. When we think of the homeless person with the severe and often untreated mental illness, we see them as a loner and cut off from the rest of the world. And this is part of that pathology of the homeless mentally ill. Perhaps less severely, the average person is out of the optimal zone when they are not sufficiently plugged into the human resources around them that give like meaning and purpose and kind of the spice of life. Another signal of good mental health involves achieving an optimal balance in several areas of life. We must balance the issues of work versus home and attention to ourself versus others. If one of these is out of balance, we get out of the optimal zone. If we emphasize work, we might get kudos and accolades from a boss and coworkers and prizes and raises and promotions and prestige and recognition and maybe, not always, a high salary. But if we do this at the expense of our health or our mental health with a lot of stress and fatigue and joylessness, then we haven't really achieved as much as we thought. If we have an optimal home life with good personal relationships, hobbies, a nice place to live, and not lots of fun, but we neglect to perform adequately in our work life and plan our careers and develop our professional self, then we can't really make it in a society that demands that able-bodied people work. One of the things that is part of my initial assessment with clients is to see to what degree their home life is balanced with their work life. In most cases, we need to work to balance this by strengthening either one or the other. And this is where a lot of my work in career coaching for gay men comes in. And I do that with guys literally all over the world, and mostly in Los Angeles, but often other states in the United States and really all over the world. So similar to doing what you love, another hallmark of mental health is what I call creating new good memories. So think about your life thus far. What do you recall as being some of the happiest times of your life? What comes to mind? Where were you? Who was with you? What were you doing? What was fun about it? How do you feel when you recall these times? If you're like most people, you'd probably just smile a little bit, right? It's a good mood buoyant to recall good memories. And how do we make good memories? By doing what we love and being with people we care about. As much as these positive attributes contribute to our overall mental health, it's also important to clear the wreckage, as the axiom in Alcoholics Anonymous says. In order to have optimal functioning and be in our good zone mentally, we need to have resolved and cope with past hurts, abuses, and negative or traumatic experiences. Negative experiences in life, like these, pour dirt into our souls, and we need to have a way of cleaning it out. Often the goals of therapy can include processing, talking with emotional expression and a kind of emotional catharsis about such experiences, including what happened, when, where, and by whom, and how we felt about it, and what we did about it then, and what we must do about it now. Just after 9/11, many of my clients had to process what this experience meant for them in order to make sense of it existentially. Some were angry, some were sad, some made macabre jokes, others feigned indifference. But all of them were trying to cope with something that was part of our collective experience in our culture and in our times. Some clients have processed experiences of verbal, physical, and sexual abuse from their childhoods or early adolescence. Others have processed traumas such as being diagnosed with a serious illness or experiencing an accident, surviving a natural disaster, or losing a loved one. Some of my clients have experienced multiple traumas or a combination of circumstances so severe that it just defies comprehension that much stuff can happen to one person. As painful as it can be to recall and process these experiences, doing this work provides a catharsis and an opportunity for healing of the soul that then allows that person to heal and grow and thrive into a new zone of self-empowerment and mental health. Now let's look at some challenges in mental health. Self-empowerment when it comes to mental health is understanding that our emotions are messages that we must respond to, not just react to. Emotions are a tool for us to use to make sense of the world around us and to give us a sense of who we are in the world. Emotions are a sign that something needs our attention and sometimes intervention. If we're overwhelmed with the many symptoms and manifestations of depression, anxiety, or other myriad psychiatric conditions, we're not self-empowered. We are in need of external resources, such as a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist, which is a type of MD, medical doctor, who prescribes medications especially for psychiatric disorders. But even if a person does not have a severe disorder, such as a major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, or panic disorder, when our mental health is not good, we can be not self-empowered because our emotions are ruling us instead of the other way around. It's like the tail is wagging the dog. We feel helpless, at the mercy of our emotions, and feel that an outside force is oppressing us and keeping us from our best life's good. This is an illusion, of course, but we must not buy into the helplessness and the hopeless thinking that might tempt us. I worked with a client who verbally abused his partner. In therapy, I confronted him on the destructive nature of this habit, which was his choice. He defended himself and said that he couldn't help it, and I confronted that too. He absolutely had a choice in his expression and language, and how and who it was directed at, and with the responsibility for the effect of his behavior on others. The idea that one is helpless to their emotions is a fallacy. We might be racked with grief at a severe loss and feel the emotional pain of this deeply, but it is entirely up to us on what we do with those emotions in adaptive coping. We could stay home, become lazy, and gain a ton of weight, wallowing in our own self-pity, or we could seek out a community support group and talk about our feelings that will lead to healing after a traumatic loss. We have choices. A good tip when feeling strong emotions is asking yourself, what can I do about this? And then brainstorm a list of options that begin with, I could. Do that on a document, on your computer, or on your phone, or on a piece of paper. Start with I could at the top, and then write down your behavioral options of how you can cope with something, and you're going to feel much more empowered than how you started. So there's more in the book about mental health, about the role of medications, about the role of mental health in finances, but I want to just give you that sample from the mental health chapter. And then other chapters in the book are about your health, are about relationships and sex, about your career, and about your finances. Maybe in future episodes we'll do a few more excerpts. But if you want the whole book, it's about $11 in the US, I think, on Amazon. Just check on Amazon.com. You can also look on Lulu, LULU.com, which is the publishing house for the book. And again, the title, you want to look for Self-Empowerment, Have the Life You Want, by me, Ken Howard, LCSW. So I hope you enjoyed some of that. I think the part that applies to gay men, which is probably the part you're waiting for, is that mental health issues as applied to the LGBT community in general and to my focus, gay men in particular, gay men as individuals or couples, is that gay men's mental health challenges are always in a sociocultural context. Different, I get statistics on which states you guys are in, and I'm always very humbled and very honored to really learn that this show is heard in downloads in just about all 50 states and in a couple dozen other countries around the world. So when we talk about gay men's mental health, we're talking about not only what mental health issues or challenges that gay men can go through, but they do it in the context of a culture where your legal rights, your civil rights, the overall day-to-day culture will really vary. Where, of course, the cultures that are more gay-friendly and where there's more legal civil rights are likely to enhance gay men's mental health, as opposed to the states or the countries where gay rights are seen as a low priority by the general population, by the governor, or the legislature, or the head of state. And that's an additional challenge to whatever that person's going through. I think also there can be increased representation of alcohol and drug issues with the LGBT community because of those social stressors. So they might be burdened not only by a substance they've become dependent on, but they're also burdened by the rejection from society that has led them to turn to drugs or alcohol for respite. Mental health in gay men, of course, if we look at that historically in the United States, before 1973, homosexuality was considered a mental illness. You know, I would have been my own enemy as a gay man and a mental health professional in the 50s and 60s. Now, there were some gay affirmative, mental health professionals back then, but, homosexuality wasn't removed from the big catalog, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, published by the American Psychiatric Association, until 1973, and even then it was controversial, and even then it took a lot of argument from people that wanted to say, oh, men are homosexuals because they were too close to their mother, or because of, I don't know, so that it was some kind of a, birth defect, as opposed to just a naturally occurring difference that occurs in people all over the world in all cultures throughout time. So, sometimes there's differences. Somebody asked me one time, you work with depression? I said, yes. They said, what's gay depression? And I said, well, a gay man with depression might respond to, say, cognitive behavioral therapy or the SSRI family of antidepressant medications, or both. But what's going to be different is that the straight man would not necessarily have the societal prejudice that the gay man would. And then there would be other, maybe, sources of stress that might pressure somebody with depression, such as the emphasis on body image or the emphasis on youth and beauty. Gay men are a competitive bunch. There are other competitive pockets, women who compete in beauty pageants, or even men who compete in sports might be held to a body image standard. But it just means that being gay or lesbian or LGBT overall can have an extra layer that is a risk factor for mental health problems. It doesn't mean that gay people are crazy or less than. It means that the social prejudice that we tend to face can exacerbate existing mental health challenges. It certainly, doesn't help that someone with bipolar disorder, let's say, might also be the victim of an anti-gay hate crime or job discrimination or something like that. So, as LGBT people, we have to fight for social justice at the same time that personally we're fighting to be in that zone of pristine mental health. So, if you'd like some support for being in that zone of pristine mental health, then I hope you'll consider working with me or one of the associate clinicians at Gay Therapy LA. We're based in Los Angeles, but currently in September of 2020, which is when I'm recording this, we're doing everything online and through webcam platforms during the COVID crisis. But then I also have worked a long time in coaching with guys all over the United States and all over the world. So if you'd like more information on that, in the U.S. you can call or just text from wherever, area code 310-339-5778. So that's 310-339-5778. Or you can email me, Ken, at gaytherapyla.com. And on that website, on gaytherapyla.com, if you hit the blog tab, there are dozens of articles that you can read and a search box that you can search on topics. And in addition to the previous or future episodes of the podcast, you can also look up the blog articles. And that would be another sample. So today's all about samples. Samples through the blog, through the podcast, and through the book. And then if you want direct individualized help, I and my associate clinicians of the practice are here for you. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.